Today, we're going to be taking a look at the astrology chart of Jennifer Lopez. There's been a lot of rumors recently, and she's been in the news quite a bit. People are alleging that there's problems with her husband, Ben Affleck. And for example, they're apparently selling the house they bought together when they got married. And there's also the issue that she canceled her tour. People are thinking that it was to work on the marriage. So what we're going to take a look at today using the astrology chart is, in astrology, there's actually different houses and planets that can be responsible for a divorce if that takes place. So we're going to be really analyzing the chart and seeing if it looks like it's moving in that direction. Of course, I want the best for the couple. When we're talking about planetary energies, we're talking more about influences of the planets, but always keep in mind people have their free will. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. We're also going to take a look at some of the emotional themes using astrology of some of the marriages she's had, and I'm going to show you how to calculate that as well. So, for those of you that are new to my channel, make sure that you like and subscribe. Thank you to all my new patrons and new subscribers. Very much appreciated. I practice Vedic a sidereal astrology, which is the astrology from ancient India. It might be a little bit different than the astrology that you see maybe in the newspapers and magazines and so forth. The goal is 10,000 subscribers at this point. And also, if you're interested in a private reading, check for details down below. I am running a special discount for the month of June if you're interested. Also, I do want to remind everyone that this astrology reading is for entertainment purposes only. All the statements I'm making about Jennifer Lopez, they're all allegedlys, and we're just speculating as to the astrological energies involved. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and talk about the current situation, and I'm going to give you an outline of some of the things we're going to talk about really quick, well, in this presentation. So allegedly, J-Lo, she goes by J-Lo, and Ben Affleck are selling their marital home. Many are speculating that a divorce is imminent. And I've been hearing that there's been rumors that they're pretty much already living apart, apparently. The things we're going to look at is, do the planetary energies, first of all, do they support a divorce? We're going to take an astrological look into J-Lo's 4 marriages. So her marriage to Ben Affleck is the 4th marriage. And I didn't know that before I was researching for this video. And then we're going to take just analyze a little bit of the marriage with Ben Affleck and what's going on with that whole situation at the moment. So let's go talk about, first of all, what type of planetary periods would typically trigger a divorce. Now, we go through planetary periods all the time. We go through periods of the 6th Lord, the 8th Lord, Ketu, Rahu. We're going to be going through those periods. It's not going to mean every time you're going through that period, there's going to be a divorce. So I do want to put that caveat out there. If you're in a Rahu or a Ketu period, it doesn't mean you're going to get a divorce by any means. Usually you're going to want to see that other factors are going to be involved in the astrological chart. And then also you got to take a look at your life. Are things going well? Does it look like it's going in a negative direction? So those are the things you want to look at when you're trying to analyze your own life or your own astrology chart. And so let's go ahead and talk about some of the factors here when we're talking about a divorce. Now, there's a lot of different factors here to look at. Usually you're going to want more than one factor. Just being in a K2 dasha is not going to say that you're going to get a divorce. You're usually going to want some sort of supporting transit or something along those lines. And even like the major period, which is the Mahadasha, or the sub period, which is the Antardasha, you're going to want them to both have some sort of signification of divorce there. So K2 dashas are usually associated with surrender, kind of the I give up kind of type of divorce. Rahu can be associated with disasters and also affairs, because Rahu tends to get us to push boundaries. Saturn can be associated with relationships that fail, maybe because of a lack of resources, like the joint marital state fails or something like that, and it just won't last under that. For example, finances. Venus, and by the way, Venus is generally not a divorce planet. It's usually actually the marriage planet. But if it's afflicted, it can represent a lack of harmony leading to a divorce. And then the 2nd Lord, if you're in a period of a planet that rules the 2nd house, it can represent like a new relationship that's kind of replacing the old one. So yeah, typically there's usually this idea of there could be some cheating going on if the second lord is involved. The sixth lord is just pure conflict. There's usually going to be some sort of discord or disharmony going on, and it just you can't get along, and that's why it breaks up. Um, Eighth lord is going to be someone just leaves suddenly. For example, everyone knows somebody where they had a spouse or a boyfriend girlfriend that they came home one day and the closet was cleared out and they just were suddenly gone. Well, that would be the eighth house, like shock. And then some supporting transits that are usually occurring during a divorce. For example, I didn't put Rahu and Ketu there, but Rahu and Ketu, typically they'd be transiting like the first or seventh houses, and it can be reversed, like the seventh or first houses, depending on Rahu or Ketu. A Saturn transit through the seventh house can cause a divorce because it can cause issues. Also, Saturn transit through the eighth house can show a potential divorce, especially if it's the seventh lord. And we'll be talking about that because that's actually occurring in JLo's chart. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at the chart for a moment. Now, we're going to talk about the planetary period. The planetary period she's in right now is Venus Mahadasha. This is the major period between 2013 and 2033. So what I wanted to look at is the condition of Venus in the chart, and then we'll go back to the slide. Okay, so let me go ahead and draw on the chart for a second. So in JLo's chart, you'll notice that Venus is in the 11th house of Taurus. It's really strong. And by the way, the 11th house is not a bad house at all. So I would not be considering this like, oh, you're going to get divorced because it's in the 11th house. And also, it rules the fourth house. It's again, those are not really divorce houses. 11th house can actually be a time where you make a lot of money, you meet a new you meet a lot new friends. Remember, this is a very long period, so it's a very generalized type of energy. One of the issues I'm worried about when I look at this chart is you'll notice that, well, Mars, this is where Venus is being afflicted. So planet Mars right here is it's aspecting Venus with its seventh aspect. So if we count the houses here, you'll see seven aspect. It's basically an opposition to Venus. And so this is considered like the planet is afflicting Venus in the chart. Also, keep in mind that Venus is very strong in its own sign of Scorpio. So that aspect right there is going to send some affliction. Now, this is going to be influencing most of JLo's relationships throughout her life are going to have this affliction. And so what Mars, when it's afflicting Venus, it can cause like marital discord, disharmony, difficulty, excess Mars energy. So our excess Mars energy is going to create just like argumentative energy, bickering type of energy, and it can be a real tricky energy to deal with. So when we're looking at Venus Mahadasha, it is very focused on relationships, but remember, we got that Mars aspect on it. And remember, if we go back to the slide, one of the potential periods of a divorce is if Venus is afflicted. So we see that Venus, it does appear to be afflicted in the chart. The other thing I want to point out, and let me clean up the chart for a moment. We're going to look at the Navamsa chart as well, just to look at the condition of Venus in the Navamsa chart. So let me go ahead and pull and hang on. This is the Navamsa chart. Remember, this is called the D9 chart. This is a supplemental chart we use in Vedic astrology. You'll notice that Venus is in the 12th house of the Navamsa chart. The 12th house, it can be associated with endings and losses. Now, typically 12th house, it does represent endings. It's usually a loss of vitality. Usually I see the sixth lord or the eighth lord if it's a divorce, but still it's in a difficult house. But one thing I do want to point out, look at where Venus is next to. It's next to Saturn, and Saturn rules the sixth house. So there's an issue there because whenever you have Saturn next to a planet, Saturn's bringing difficulty and issues. So in the Navamsa chart, we see that Venus is being afflicted by Saturn, which is the sixth lord. Again, this kind of lends to this idea that there could be some difficulty during especially this Venus Mahadasha in the relationships, but also in relationships. I want to make it clear in relationships in general. I'm going to go ahead and put it back to the D1 chart because we're going to be looking at that in a moment. So Venus Mahadasha, like I said, it's a 20-year period. That's the larger period where the energy is more generalized. It's 2013 to 2033. Venus typically represents relationships. Like I said earlier, it doesn't represent divorce by itself. It represents relationships, harmony, contracts, marriage. But if it's afflicted, it can represent difficulty in your relationships that could lead to a divorce. So Venus, remember, it's aspected by Mars in the fifth house of Scorpio, and Mars can cause increased arguments, misunderstandings, conflicts in romantic relationships. So that can definitely lead, it can trigger some difficulties. And then remember, Venus is in the 12th house, which represents endings, and it's conjunct Saturn. Saturn is an oppressive influence on the relationship. It's the sixth lord. And the sixth house is it can represent conflict, disharmony, addictions, even. By the way, these are all allegedlys. But the sixth house, it can represent things like addictions or health challenges, things like that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the sub period she's in. Remember when we talk about sub periods in Vedic astrology, we're usually that's the more acute, powerful energy in the astrology chart. So Jupiter is going to be from January 2024, which in terms of Vedic astrology, she's only been in it for 6 months. It's actually still pretty early, and she's going to be in it till September of 2026. So it's about what, 2.5 years that she's going to be in this period. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the condition of Jupiter. So she's smack dab early into this period, so that's something to consider. Now let's go ahead and look at the chart first. All right, let me pull that up and let me draw on it for a second. So Jupiter, it's in the third house and it's associated with K2. Remember, we talked about K2 can be associated with divorce. So that's a difficult indication there. And then Jupiter itself, it rules the sixth house of Sagittarius and the ninth house of Pisces. Now, the ninth house isn't really going to be a problem. It's more of the sixth house we're worried about. The sixth house is being activated. And remember, we got disharmony, conflict, imbalance, addictions, all those kind of themes can be associated with the sixth house. Okay, so the sixth house is problems. Okay, conflict. At the very base level, it can just represent just arguing a lot, bickering a lot, and it can bring up a lot of just disharmonious circumstances within the relationship. Now, like I said before, is this a foregone conclusion that there's going to be a divorce? No. But the sixth house is a difficult period. So even if the marriage survives during this period, she's still in a really difficult period. The other thing I want to point out, another meaning for the sixth house is loss of contract. And this is why it means divorce. So if you actually look at where the seventh house is, which this is marriage, right? This is marriage. If you count 12 houses from the seventh house, that's the sixth house. So this is 12 houses from the seventh house. And so this is like loss of contract or loss of the marriage. So that's one of the things why sixth house can represent divorce. There's a loss of contract, a loss of agreement in being able to renew the relationship. And sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes the issue is a loss of agreement. Like, for example, there might be something they don't see eye to eye on and they can't come to some sort of compromise on it because the sixth house is like, remember, there's that loss of agreement. You can't, in the seventh house, you're trying to make an agreement. You're trying to come to some sort of compromise, but there isn't a compromise. So let's talk about Jupiter. So Jupiter's already showing us that there's potential there. I mean, we got Jupiter with K2, and then we have Jupiter as the sixth lord, which can represent end of contract. And let me go ahead and change the slide here. So Jupiter is sixth lord. Like I said, the sixth house can represent divorce, conflict, disharmony, obstacles, discord, deception, imbalance, debt. And so so that's quite interesting. Let's take a look at, and not interesting in a good way, but interesting in, it's informative, but it's not like I like seeing people get a divorce, by the way. Let's see where Jupiter is in the Navamsa chart. And I think I need to switch the chart. So we saw Jupiter where it is in the D1 chart. Let's switch it to the Navamsa chart. Remember, this is the supplemental chart we use in Vedic astrology. The Navamsa chart is typically used, we analyze marriage with it. We also analyze things like spiritual purpose, and things like that. But it's not the chart of physical manifestation. This can be more of the emotional aspect of the chart. And the thing to point out is we have Jupiter in the seventh house. So this Jupiter Antardasha between 2024 and 2026, the focus, and by the way, it rules the seventh house too and the fourth house. So the focus is on home and marriage. So for example, the D1 chart shows it's the sixth lord, and it's like, okay, what is this loss of contract focused on? What is the emotional focus on? And you'll see Jupiter's in the seventh house of the Navamsa. Well, there's a big focus on marriage right now. So definitely we can see, that the sixth, this conflict has to do with the marriage in the relationship. Now, I know that you didn't need an astrology chart to show you that, but and let me go ahead and put up the other chart for a moment, because we are going to go. I'm going to show you how to calculate seventh from moon, so we can look at the four marriages that Jennifer Lopez had. We can look at which was the general theme of each one. Now we could do a way deeper dive on each marriage, but just for the brevity of the video, just to make it, within a reasonable length, we're just going to kind of do a short house synopsis of what the theme of each marriage could have been. So Jupiter, again, it's going to be a difficult period. It's focused on marriage. I do feel, because Jupiter's in the seventh house of the Navamsa chart, there's definitely a focus on, when she ended this tour, I do feel like it is to try to save the marriage, try to help it in some sort of way. Because Jupiter does have a sense of optimism, like you're trying to do something that you feel is right, or that your moral compass is letting you know. Now, I don't have Ben Affleck's chart in front of me right now, too, so I can't really see the astrological motives there. But I feel like the motive in at least J-Lo's chart is there's a motive like, let's try to fix this. Let's make an attempt here. Sometimes people, they can see the writing on the wall and there's not really much of an attempt made, but I don't think that that's the case at all here. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the four marriages that J-Lo had. And I did not know this before making of this video. I know I remembered Mark Antony, but I did not know that she had actually two previous marriages before that. So four marriages, and each one of them is represented, if you notice, by a particular house. And I'm going to describe to you, this is called seventh from moon, and this can give you the emotional climate of a marriage. So it's just an emotional theme. Our experience of marriage is going to be mostly like, how do we feel about a marriage? It's not necessarily, it can be some of the physical aspects, like, how much money your spouse has, or the house you live in, but most of it's an emotional feeling that you have of a particular person. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to pull up the chart, and I'm going to show you, first of all, this is how you calculate. And let me change this for a second. How do you calculate your first marriage? Okay. And let's look at that. Okay. So what you're going to do is you want to count 7 houses from your moon, because seventh house represents marriage, right? So what is your first marriage going to feel like? Okay, well, in one, if we count the houses, 7 from moon, you're going to get the 11th house here. Okay. So the first marriage was the 11th house. The 11th house, it represents friendships. It represents networking. It's actually fairly good. And Venus is there. So it could show that actually there was some enjoyment out of it. I mean, we'd have to talk to J-Lo to see what it was like. But remember, we do got that Mars aspect. So there definitely wasn't perfect. It did come to an end at some point. But that's how you calculate the first marriage. But let me tell you how we calculate the next ones after that, because you don't just count 7 houses from that house. So let's say this is the first marriage. Okay. First marriage. What you need to do is you need to count 8 houses from this house, because that's the death and rebirth of a new marriage. And then you need to count 8 houses for every house. Okay. So what we would do is we'd say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the second marriage, this would be marriage number 2, second, would be represented by the 6th house. And then what we do is, if there's another marriage after that, we count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, the third marriage would be represented by the first house. And I'm not going to do it for the fourth one, but I'll show you. So basically, after the first one, you do seven for moon for the first marriage. And then after every marriage after that, you count 8 houses. All right, let me pull up the chart and we'll talk about each one. I now Ohani Noah, I don't know if I pronounced it right. That's the first marriage. You'll notice seventh for moon was the 11th house. The 11th house is the general emotional theme from an astrological point of view. Now, if we talk to JLo, maybe she'll have lots to say about it. But generally, the 11th house is like someone you meet. You're kind of like you meet through friends, or the theme might be friendship. You have a lot in common, common goals, networking. The potential could be there that maybe they had a lot of similar dreams or aspirations. And there was a certain like friendliness or chattiness that may have at least been in the beginning. Remember, we got that Mars aspect to the first one. Then when we count 8 houses to the next one, we get Chris Judd, and that was the sixth house. So the sixth house is really difficult. In the marriages that I've seen, whenever they have the sixth house activated, it's usually one of these marriages. It's really difficult to stay together in this one because there's so much imbalance and disharmony in the marriage. It will tend to usually break up. So that's one of the difficulties. Then if we go to the third marriage, Mark Antony, we get the first house. So the first house, it represents the self. So Mark Antony, I don't actually know a lot about him, but they might have actually had quite a bit in common on a like consciousness core. Like their consciousness had a lot in common. And I think out of the marriages so far, that was the longest one. Okay. So it represents the first house, the self, the body, physicality, movement, spotlight, pioneers. There usually is a spotlight on this marriage. It usually involves fame. And it usually your spouse, when it's represented by the first house, your spouse will really go to bat for you. Because you have the same enemies. You have the same, difficulties. So this is why sometimes when the first house is being activated, it can be a relationship that lasts a long time. Now that marriage did end and it went to Ben Affleck, which is represented by the eighth house. Now, the eighth house is an interesting house. Okay. So, first of all, it represents transformation and healing. I do want to point that out. It does represent secrets and joint finances. There's a lot to unpack there. The eighth house isn't necessarily a bad house. I mean, it represents change, transformation. For those of you that are into yoga, the eighth house represents Tantra, the occult. I mean, so it could be a marriage where, for example, like some sort of esoteric spiritual practices are taking place. However, for most people, it will represent there's some sort of secrets that are being involved. And so also I do want to point out when the eighth house is activated like that, usually there's secrets that the public doesn't even know, something that's being kept from public disclosure. So there might be, a lot of people are speculating as to why there's a big problem there, but we might totally not know the full picture at all what's going on with this, because eighth house represents secrets. But it does represent healing as well, because when you have a marriage that's represented by the eighth house, it can represent that there's a certain level of healing that's taking place from a lot of your past relationships. So a lot of those issues are coming to the surface to be healed. It's a really tricky energy to deal with, though. So I do want to point that out. It's a tricky energy. You have to be very conscious to deal with this sort of energy, but it can be very healing, and it can actually be long lasting if both people are conscious in the relationship, but it's difficult. Let's go ahead and put the slide up again. I wanted to make some conclusions about this. I don't want to say a bad omen on their marriage, because actually, I hope they succeed. Or succeed. So, like I said, the eighth house represents transformation and healing. Some of the healing could be, I know that Ben Affleck, he had some problems with substances and things like that. Part of the healing could be it was very healing for him as well. And maybe that's something that he's been struggling with to heal. So I do want to point out, and so it's an intense energy. Uh, Also, I do want to point out, and I did say that in the slide, it also could be there's a big focus on really building up the marital estate and finances, really just like building up the business, assets, and really just trying to make the most of being married together. Because, even though we want the love marriage, there's a big part of marriage that can be very business like, in that you share assets and things like that. Okay, so J Lo, she does have Venus afflicted in her chart by Mars. That's difficult. It can be a tough energy to deal with. In general, the romantic relationships can lead to quarreling and things if that Mars energy is not reined in and put under control. So that can be difficult in general. She is in a Mars Mahadasha. We did talk about that. So that is being activated. All that things with the Venus and then Mars being afflicted. She's in a Jupiter Antardasha that activates the sixth house. The sixth house can represent a loss of agreement or loss of contract. So it can represent divorce. The energies are very difficult right now. Okay. Now, I don't think I brought up Saturn in the eighth house. And let me bring that up really fast, because I did not bring that up and I need to bring that up. So, the other aspect to this, besides the two planetary periods that she's in, the larger period and the sub period, we have to talk about the Saturn transit. Okay. Saturn's going through the eighth house of JLo's chart right now. And Saturn going through the eighth house, it represents death and rebirth. It can represent divorce. Okay. It can represent that if all the other circumstances are pointing to it, but it actually represents things being frozen. So if there was a divorce, it can represent that it may not, like Saturn creates this like stubbornness to want to really move forward into a new life. Because remember, it's death and rebirth. Something essentially metaphorically dies, and then something new is born. So Saturn can create a stubbornness to want to change, and make that change. So this might be a very slow process. Now, the Saturn transit, it's going to continue till March of 2025. If there is a divorce, it may actually be finalized after that point, if there is one. Okay. But eighth house can be a very difficult energy, because it's like you're in a period of crisis during the whole transit. And this transit started, by the way, in January of 2023. So it's like as soon as January 2023, there was like a crisis that occurred. Okay. And it can be on a lot of levels. I don't want to say it was just, we can't say that it was just the marriage thing, but it can represent a crisis, because, the eighth house can represent marital discord, marital crisis, and then it represents transformation of the identity, which can happen through a divorce. So I wish them all the best. I actually wish them the best of luck. There's always free will in all this, and people can use their knowledge. And in Vedic astrology, we believe in remedies, like karmic remedies, to bring in more harmony. So if you're conscious enough and you can use your free will, you could definitely reverse this situation. But it's a difficult situation. Like if you're unconscious, it can be a difficult energy to overcome. So that's what I have to share about JLo's chart right now. I hope that you learned a lot. I think that what's really interesting was the seventh from moon aspects, where you can see each marriage has a theme. And if any of you have a marriage or more than one marriage, you can use that in your own astrology charts to kind of see what the astrological emotional theme is for each marriage. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and I will see you all in the next one.